The British government has proposed reforms to the Official Secrets Act that could potentially see journalists and whistleblowers punished with much harsher sentencing for publishing things that the government doesn't like. Now, this comes as the United Kingdom has granted the United States limited permission to appeal a judge's decision in January not to extradite Julian Assange. A key witness for the US prosecution recently admitted to fabricating their testimony against Assange. So why is the UK allowing the proceedings to go ahead anyway and clamping down on the rights of journalists? I'm Richard Medhurst, and you're watching the Communiqué. The case against Julian Assange is not just an attack on journalism. It's a case that is filled with anomalies, illegalities, and government wrongdoing and foul play. Julian Assange's extradition hearing took place almost a year ago in September 2020 in London, dubbed the trial of the century. I was there as it unfolded, and we covered it extensively on this program. Now, in January earlier this year, the judge overseeing the case, Judge Medhurst, decided not to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. The incoming Biden administration made it clear that it would be appealing this decision and moving forward with the Trump administration's plan to jail the Australian journalist and founder of WikiLeaks. Now, 6 months later, in July of 2021, a British High Court gave the United States permission to appeal that decision. The United States attempted to appeal on 5 grounds, however, only 3 were granted by the High Court. Now, the grounds of appeal deal almost exclusively with Julian Assange's health and the potential risk of suicide were he to be sent to the United States. During both pre-trial and post-trial, Assange would most certainly be placed in solitary confinement in a U.S. federal super maximum prison, such as ADX Florence in Colorado. Judge Medhurst ruled that an extradition to the United States would pose such a significant risk to Assange's health that she blocked it on those grounds. However, she did agree with all of the other arguments put forward by the U.S. prosecution, namely the political charges such as espionage and conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. If convicted, Assange could face up to 175 years in prison. Such a ruling is dangerous because it effectively criminalizes journalism and national security reporting. It's saying that if you publish damning evidence of U.S. war crimes in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Guantanamo Bay, and diplomatic cables, you will be sent to jail for informing the public. Now, this means that an appeal in the UK High Court will only discuss Julian Assange's health and the prospects of his extradition and nothing else, because the judge has already accepted that his publishing, his work, his journalism amount to criminal behavior. Needless to say, this is a disaster for journalists everywhere and highlights just how problematic this entire case is. Now, the defense does have an opportunity to cross-appeal the decision, which would allow them to dispute the judge's agreement with the political charges. However, this is uncertain yet, as no announcement on that move has been made thus far. Now, just as the United States was granted this limited permission to appeal, it turns out the United States also made an offer to the UK that it could let Julian Assange potentially serve his sentence in his home country of Australia. The US also provided assurances that it would not place Julian Assange under special administrative measures, also known as SAMs. SAMs are a very strict regime where prisoners are kept in solitary confinement up to 23 hours a day. All of their incoming and outgoing mail is screened. They are only allowed 1 telephone call a month for 30 minutes, only to a pre-approved person. And this call, they must request this call in advance so that a government agent can be made available to spy on the conversation. The prisoners' conversations with their lawyers are also monitored. As a matter of fact, the lawyers themselves are placed under a gag order, preventing them from telling the outside world about their clients' conditions and what's happening inside of the jail. These horrific conditions are very likely what Assange would be placed under were he to be extradited to the United States. Everyone understands this, including the judge. Now, in court, the United States lawyers repeatedly argued that SAMs were not that bad, right? They made an attempt to portray these inhumane prison conditions in the United States as acceptable or humane. The prosecution even argued that there was an appeal process for prisoners to progressively lift these restrictions on themselves, even though not a single prisoner has ever succeeded in doing so. Now, Gary McKinnon, who's a Scottish systems administrator, he's said to have perpetrated the biggest computer hack of all time. In 2002, he accessed computers belonging to the US Air Force, Navy, the Department of Defense, NASA, and much more. The US also tried to extradite him to face jail time, but ultimately failed after a lengthy and grueling legal battle that lasted a decade. I spoke with Gary not too long ago, and I asked him about the so-called assurances that he was given by the United States at the time. And unsurprisingly, he told me that they're worthless, just like the ones that have been made to Assange now. Now, reacting to these so-called assurances, Assange's partner and fiancée Stella Morris said, quote, "They aren't worth the paper they're written on." She was quick to remind people that these assurances emanate from the same US figures and organizations who spied on Assange and tried to steal their son's diaper from the Ecuadorian embassy for DNA analysis. Morris also lambasted the media for reporting inaccurately on these assurances, right, as if they were set in stone and 100% guaranteed, when in fact there is a very important distinction to be made. The United States did not say that it won't place Assange under SAMS. It said that it might not place Assange under SAMS, and that is not the same thing. Right? In their so-called assurances, the US explicitly says that it still reserves the right to place Julian Assange under special administrative measures if he does something that would warrant such a regime, whatever that might be. The US also said that it won't place Assange in ADX Florence, which is the super maximum prison in Colorado. It didn't say it won't place him in any supermax. It just said ADX Florence, and that's a problem because ADX Florence is the only super maximum prison at the federal level, but the United States has many other super maximum prisons. And it did not say that it won't place Assange in any of its super maximum prisons. It only mentioned ADX Florence. Again, this is why no one can trust the United States and their reassurances, because they don't mean anything. The United States also said that Assange would be able to serve a sentence in Australia. But why should Assange serve any sentence, whether in the US or Australia or elsewhere? Assange is an innocent man. He's not been convicted of the crimes that they are accusing him of, and yet he still sits in Belmarsh prison in a maximum security jail. Why is that? Ultimately, the decision to place him under special administrative measures will be left up to the CIA director and the Attorney General. And given the intelligence community's animosity and contempt for Assange, and the fact that the DOJ is going after him so viciously from administration to administration, it's absolutely guaranteed that he will be placed under SAMS. There is no doubt about this, and the US openly advocated this possibility in court, as I've seen myself. Now, these developments, they come at a strange time, however. Barely a week before the United States was granted limited permission to appeal, a bombshell revelation appeared in an Icelandic newspaper named Stundin. One of the key witnesses in the prosecution against Assange admitted that he had lied and fabricated his entire witness statement against the WikiLeaks founder. Sigurdur Thordarson, also known as Siggy the Hacker, is referred to in the US indictment as teenager. Now, this superseding indictment was unsealed in June 2020, just before the extradition hearing was set to proceed at the Old Bailey in London. The new indictment contained no new charges. Instead, it only had conduct, alleged conduct, which refers to narrative taken from testimonies like Siggy the Hacker's or from Sabu, who's another hacker turned FBI informant. This alleged conduct had only one purpose, which was to paint Assange as a hacker and a cybercriminal rather than a journalist. And although there were no new charges, this alleged conduct would be helpful for the prosecution in securing a conviction and or stronger sentencing. In his witness statement to the court, Thordarson exaggerated his relationship with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. He falsely claimed that Assange had instructed him to commit a number of crimes together, such as stealing encrypted banking files and recording the phone call conversations of members of parliament in Iceland, referred to in the indictment as NATO Country 1. Quote, Thordarson now admits to Stundin that Assange never asked him to hack or access phone recordings of MPs. His new claim is that he had in fact received some files from a third party who claimed to have recorded MPs and had offered to share them with Assange without having any idea what they actually contained. He claims he never checked the contents of the files, or even if they contained audio recordings, as his third-party source suggested. He further admits the claim that Assange had instructed or asked him to access computers in order to find any such recordings is false. Now, during his time with WikiLeaks, Thordarson also worked to hurt the organization. He impersonated Julian Assange and embezzled $50,000 from online sales while committing various other crimes that were unbeknownst to Assange and WikiLeaks. Quote, Thordarson also admits that he stole documents from WikiLeaks staff by copying their hard drives. Among those were documents from Renata Avila, a lawyer who worked for the organization, and Mr. Assange. Now, Torderson also went on to contact the US Embassy in Iceland and volunteer to become an informant against Assange. Within 48 hours, a private jet full of US government agents touched down in Iceland in order to begin working with him. It's incredible, absolutely incredible then, that barely a week after this explosive revelation, the UK still decides to grant the US limited permission to appeal. I mean, the entire indictment is based on lies. And unfortunately, Judge Baretzer's ruling was formulated based on those lies. Usually, one would expect this case to be thrown out after such a bombshell revelation. And yet, that has not happened. We'll be right back after this short break. I'm joined by investigative journalist Stefania Morizzi. She contributes to a major Italian daily, Il Fatto Quotidiano, and has previously written extensively for some of the best newspapers in Italy, such as Espresso and Repubblica. She's renowned the world over for her amazing work as a media partner with WikiLeaks, and has also worked previously with Glenn Greenwald on the NSA leaks from Edward Snowden. She's a good friend, and it's my pleasure to welcome her. Thanks for coming on, Stefania. It's really great to have you.
Oh, thanks to you, Richard. Thanks so much.
So, Stefania, I'd like to start out with the fact that just recently, Julian Assange turned 50 years old while he's locked up inside Belmarsh prison in London. And you've known him a long time. You know, very tragically, he spent his entire 40s being persecuted by various governments for his journalism, hasn't he?
Well, first of all, I can remember that I was one of the journalists invited to his 40th birthday party, and I couldn't attend it. I couldn't be there because I was under pressure working on my book. And I mean, it was so sad. Now I realize how sad it is, because he has always been under confinement, under house arrest. His 40th birthday party was at Ellingham Hall. He was under house arrest. And then inside the embassy, 7 years, 6 years and 8 months without an hour outdoors. And then now in maximum security prison, the so-called British Guantanamo. And, you know, he has never known freedom again.
We recently had a bombshell revelation in the Icelandic newspaper in Stundin that one of the key witnesses who's testifying against Julian for the U.S. prosecution, Sigurdur Torderson, who's also known as Siggy the Hacker, he fabricated his testimony. I mean, this is an incredible development. So you would think that the entire case would collapse based on this alone, never mind all the other cases of foul play that we've seen. Why is it, do you think, that this has gone largely unreported and unconsidered by the courts and the judiciary?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it will be a serious problem for the U.S. authorities. I mean, they are relying on a person who is highly problematic, to say the least. You know, apparently, I mean, I have never met Siggy, though I have worked for 10 years, for over a decade on the WikiLeaks documentation and the case. I have never met Siggy. However, I have always heard that he was volunteering and with doing minor tasks. And it was highly problematic. And according to the many press reports, he had serious problems. He tried to steal money from WikiLeaks. He was an FBI informant, and even the Icelandic authorities were absolutely against collaborating with the FBI. This meant that they realized there was something really bad about this situation. I never heard, you know, it's quite unique that police national authorities refuse to cooperate with the FBI. Usually, you know, it is considered prestigious. It is kind of prestigious for police authorities to cooperate with the FBI. So if they refuse to cooperate, it even went public, this means that probably they smell something really bad. So I believe this case will be highly problematic for the US. So I expect some interesting development.
Yeah, I mean, it is astonishing, right? Because just barely a week after this bombshell revelation, the UK granted the US limited permission to appeal Judge Bretzer's decision not to extradite. I mean, why do you think it is that the UK gave them limited permission? And it was just on 3 grounds, right? So 3 out of 5. Why is that?
As far as I can understand, the UK did grant permission to appeal to the US, but they did not grant the appeal on the basis of his health conditions. So it seems to me that they are trying to keep these health conditions as as kind of as the unique factor on which they rely to deny extradition, which is highly problematic because they should deny extradition on the basis of his work, not just on his health conditions. This is the real scandal about this case. Had we had serious adversarial journalism, there would be a fuss, there would be a public scandal about this case. Even in the US, there is, apart from the independent media, apart from the independent reporters, and apart from Glenn Greenwald, there is basically no coverage. I believe that the public opinion understand very little about this case because there is no coverage,
And, Stefania, speaking of the United States, they said allegedly that they won't put Julian under special administrative measures or SAMs, but they reserve the right to do so, and they're also supposedly offering him an opportunity to serve a sentence in Australia. I mean, why should he serve any sentence in the first place? What do you make of these so-called assurances from the U.S.?
This case is a travesty of justice, and this case is a massive scandal. And these diplomatic assurances should never have be trusted, as Amnesty International immediately acknowledged. They are absolutely unreliable. They say, well, we will not put you in a maximum security prison in the most extreme U.S. prison, ADX Florence, but if you do something we don't like, we will reserve the right to do it. How can you accept anything like that? And he should never have a go to the U.S. No chance he goes to the U.S. and he will comes out, he should never have a go there.
Truly, I mean, I wholeheartedly share your sentiment, Stefania. And just as a last question, I was wondering if you maybe heard about the recent developments regarding the Official Secrets Act in the UK. The British government is now saying it wants to punish journalists who leak damaging information for up to 14 years. I don't know did you hear about that perhaps? Because, to me it looks like they're just kind of trying to make sure they copy the United States and keep up with, the same brand of authoritarianism.
Don't underestimate what they are doing. They have a serious strategy, a very serious strategy. And the confirmation comes from my Freedom of Information litigation on Christine Rawson, Joseph Farrell, and Sarah Harrison. They are using national security, and they are denying me this documentation about them. And this documentation is the correspondence between Scotland Yard, the so-called Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, and the U.S. Department of Justice. And they claim we cannot reveal this documentation because it would compromise the national security and our ability to fight terrorism. Can you believe they are applying anti-terror laws to journalists? And they admitted, the most serious thing is that Scotland Yard didn't deny they are journalists. They acknowledge they are journalists. So they have a plan. here. And the plan is to criminalize any kind of serious, aggressive, and fearless journalism exposing state criminality at the highest level. And they want to punish it as they publish spies. I think it's extremely important journalism, and it has been copied by many, and none of them are in prison. None of them are being put in prison, so it's it's crucial. We have to win this case, Richard. We have absolutely to win this case.
In the background, while these developments in Assange's case have been taking place, the British government has continued to clamp down on press freedoms through various means. In a document titled Legislation to Counter State Threats, which was published in May 2021, the Home Office proposed a series of reforms to the Official Secrets Act. Now, these proposed reforms seek harsher sentencing for whistleblowers and journalists who publish classified documents. Under Priti Patel's Home Office proposal, the government argues that unauthorized disclosures are just as bad, if not worse, than espionage. It says, quote, "We do not consider that there is necessarily a distinction in severity between espionage and the most serious unauthorized disclosures," unquote. So the British government is essentially saying that since journalists and publishers can reach a wider audience and reach more people, an unauthorized disclosure on their part is worse than an enemy spy stealing documents, because that would only benefit one state actor and cause less damage somehow. This is simply unbelievable. Not only that, but the British government has still failed to include an adequate public interest defense and wishes to increase the maximum sentence of 2 years for journalists and whistleblowers who publish things the government doesn't like. This document is effectively and explicitly criminalizing investigative journalism and equating it with espionage. The recent revelation in the Assange case that a key witness lied in their testimony is hardly surprising at all, because the entire legal case is filled with illegalities and wrongdoing on the behalf of various governments, and one of those governments is the British government. According to former employees of UC Global, they admit that the firm was contracted by US intelligence to spy on Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. This included listening in on Assange's conversations with his lawyers, which violates his right to a fair trial and right to due process under virtually every jurisdiction, whether EU or US or British common law. There was even a plan to kidnap and poison him, which was discussed. I mean, the fact that the judge accepted all the political charges against Assange, which are not only untrue, but also criminalizes journalism, is extremely disheartening. At the end of the day, she did block his extradition, but she also blocked his bail request. It took 6 months since the ruling just to get permission for the US to appeal, meaning that Assange could spend years in jail just getting through this dragged-out legal process, right? Languishing in Belmarsh prison, in a maximum security prison, his mental and physical health indicate. And in her ruling, Judge Bretzer, she went on through each charge under US law and equated it to British common law under the Official Secrets Act in order to satisfy the criteria for an extradition. And this expansion of the legal case into British law is worrying enough on its own. However, the new prospects and proposals by the British government go even further, and they explicitly criminalize standard journalistic activities and whistleblowers for exposing government crimes and government wrongdoing. If the big media outlets in the UK were honest, they would be outraged about what's happening to Assange or these proposed reforms to the Official Secrets Act. Instead, what do? They quietly stay away from these issues and barely report on them in order to protect the government from criticism and scrutiny, because they are dishonest actors and they work on behalf of the British state. We saw in previous months how the United Kingdom under Boris Johnson's government, with no opposition from Keir Starmer's Labour, passed several authoritarian laws. This included the Covert Human Intelligence Sources, or CHIS Act, allowing undercover agents in the UK to commit criminal acts in the name of Britain's national and economic security. We also saw the passage of the Overseas Operations Bill, giving British troops immunity from war crimes prosecutions in violation of international law. The British government then introduced the Police Court Sentencing and Crimes Bill, giving police sweeping powers to shut down protests, in addition to sentencing of up to 10 years for people who deface a statue. This suggestion by the government to equate journalists now with spies and punish them under the Official Secrets Act for doing their jobs by informing the public, this is merely an extension of these same draconian, archaic, laws. It's yet another step away from democracy and towards authoritarianism. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Richard Medhurst, and this is the Communiqué.